at the Big Fish Academy, where we are today with Polly Williams from the Royal Academy of Engineering. Hi, Polly.
Hey, hi.
And we're having a conversation about how to close the gender pay gap around the research that Polly and myself and a team at the Royal Academy of Engineering have done amongst engineering firms. And I will, if you have just joined, make sure you mute yourself, because otherwise we can hear everything you do, which may not necessarily be what you want. So let me just check if you're all, yeah. So good to have you all here. So who am I? I'm Inge Woudstra, and I have been working in the area of diversity and inclusion for the last 10 years. And mainly what I do, work with companies in tech and engineering on helping them with the gender issue. So how do you recruit more women? How do you make sure men and women advance at the same rate? How can we change the culture so it is more inclusive? My own background is in large organizations in Siemens and Shell, working in change management. And I actually started 10 years ago on my own, working with women, really out of frustration that coming from the Netherlands, that here in the UK, it was much harder to create that sort of flexibility that I needed in my role in an organization. So I thought, gosh, we need to do that differently. So I started there working with women and then grew into working with organizations. And more recently, have started to work with Rena Goldenberg Lynch from Voice at the Table, because my clients started asking me for more information on inclusion and diversity. They said, look, we want to go wider than gender. Can you help us? And that's where Rena is a real expert. So we partnered up, like Rena at Voice at the Table. She works on helping organizations create inclusive cultures. She teaches leaders on inclusive behavior, and she helps organizations create a strategy for inclusion, running, for instance, workshops with board members, running training programs on unconscious bias. So we teamed up, and actually that's where the Big Fish Academy got born, because we talked about some of the issues that our clients face, our clients you know, people working in diversity and inclusion, leading diversity and inclusion, D&I champions. And we felt a lot of them are a bit lost, really. I mean, and you may be fine, but yeah, there is so much information out there now. Like when I started 10 years ago, everyone working in D&I was just trying out things, which was fine. But actually nowadays, there is a lot of research, scientific evidence out there on how to have a real impact. And we wanted to help you get it right. Make sure you stay up to date in an easy way. Make sure you don't have to do all the research that we have to do to stay up to date, and make sure that the people that are working in D&I in organizations can have a real impact. So that's where the Big Fish Academy was born. We launched it last October. And this year in 2020, we have 6 training programs, face-to-face training programs in London coming up. But if you can't make those training programs, you can also join the webinar. Just checking, because I could hear someone. In case you're not on mute, make sure you are on mute, because we have a lot of people on the call. So it's, yeah, you don't want us to sort of hear everything you do in your room or office or meeting place or, yeah, pub, wherever you are. So thank you for joining us all here, if you've just joined. Today is really a conversation with Polly. So Polly, do you want to introduce yourself then?
Yes, so I'm Polly Williams. I'm Head of Diversity and Inclusion at the Royal Academy of Engineering. My background's equality and diversity. So I used to work for the Equality and Human Rights Commission, whereas a policy manager and advising employers on age discrimination and gender discrimination. And then I moved to an organisation where I was advising universities and practitioners within universities on how to promote diversity and inclusion for both staff and students. I've moved into STEM, the Royal Society, so looking at diversity and inclusion within STEM, academia and research, but also in industry, and now in engineering, which within the STEM space is obviously has very poor diversity, and there's a lot of enthusiasm and the drive to do more, but it's actually now looking at what makes the most difference, what has the biggest impact, and trying to really focus on kind of effective measures to move the dial.
Oh, well, thank you. It's really good to have so much knowledge on this course. So thank you for joining us. And it will really be a conversation today, because we'll be talking, Polly and I, about the gender pay gap research that Polly has done with the Royal Academy of Engineering. But I've been actively involved in the research, running the qualitative side of the research, trawling through over 50 gender pay gap reports, comparing them, running 4 focus groups with people in engineering on the gender pay gap, and then amalgamating all of that. So you'll be hearing from Polly and me on what we have found. What else are we doing today? Let me bring up our agenda. Here it is. So we'll be talking about why the gender pay gap is important, some background to the research, where did it come from, why are we doing it, and then obviously we go into findings, what did we find, and that's also when we love to hear from you. Anyway, we love to hear from you. So if you go to the bottom and open the chat, there's a little button that says chat. You can already start asking questions or say hello to your fellow participants in the chat, and we'll be picking those up. So we'd love to hear as well from you. What have you learned from making the gender pay gap? And then the last half hour, we go to recommendations, specifically for people in reward, people in HR, and leaders of organizations. And we also love to hear then your experiences and learnings as well. What have you learned? What is working for your organization? So yeah, start thinking about that, start chatting. That would be lovely. And then is there anything else you need to know? Yeah, very important. We will be recording this. And now the chat isn't visible in the recording, but we will be reading those out. So I won't necessarily mention your name or organization, but just so that you know that we are recording this and the recording is kept so people can look at it later. And in future, we have a number of recordings on our website as well. Let me see. Yeah, actually, I'd love to hear now who we've got on the call. So I'm just starting a poll here. And can you please let me know what your involvement has been with gender pay gap reporting? And maybe you've been actively involved in creating the gender pay gap report and the gender pay gap action plan. Maybe you've just been involved in creating a gender pay gap report, but not the action plan. Maybe you were in the action plan, or lots of people voting already. Maybe your organization has a report and you're aware of it, but you're really just interested and haven't been further involved. Maybe you don't have a report because you're a small organization and you're still interested in it. Or maybe actually you work for yourself, and I know we have some people like myself on the call, and you don't have a report at all. So please, yeah, cast your votes. I'll leave it open a couple more seconds. If your option isn't there, which is very well possible, just choose the closest towards it. Have you been involved? Have you not been involved? That's really what I'd love to know. Have you found how to poll? Yeah, we've almost, yeah, are you almost all voting there? Yeah, most people have voted now. Last couple of seconds to cast your vote. Be lovely to hear where you are, and then we will share the results, who's on the call. There we go. Let's end the polling and share the results. Yeah, so we can see a couple of people, actually 2, have been actively involved in the report and the plan. Some people are involved in the plan now, also 2 people. We've got 5 people who weren't involved, but just really interested in what's happening. 3 people, yeah, and a total of 6 people who, yeah, don't have a report or haven't been involved. So that's a really nice selection. Lots of people interested and some people actively involved as well. Oh, someone didn't get the poll. Oh, that's annoying. Well, Jess, I'll look into that. Definitely look into that next time, because I have no idea how to sort that this time. And obviously, if you're on the phone, you don't see the poll either. Thanks for letting us know, Jess, because that seems to be a technical issue then. So, Polly, I mean, knowing who's on the call then, I mean, I know from the Pay Index organization, who do free gender pay gap reports, that a lot of their clients, so to speak, actually are really happy with the gender pay gap reporting. They welcome it. But there's actually a significant number who say, actually, we couldn't care less. We're just doing it because it's a legal requirement. So, I mean, what is the reason this is important to the Royal Academy, and why should organizations care?
Well, I think for the Academy, we, in terms of engineering, which is just one profession, but there's a significant skills shortfall, so we need another 60,000 engineers every year, but there's also a huge diversity deficit. So there's only 12% women in engineering roles in the workforce at the moment, which is really low. So we wanted to have a look at the gender pay gap, to have a look at whether there is, looking at the gender pay gap for engineers rather than for the sector, which obviously is everybody working in engineering. So that might be people working in HR or finance and support roles, project managers and others. So we wanted to see what the engineering gender pay gap looked like for engineers, so we could maybe then pull out some useful recommendations and advice for the sector to help improve this. But you know, there's loads of really good evidence on the positive benefits that diverse teams and diverse talent bring to businesses. There's loads of research. McKinsey and others have, you know, published lots of reports. So the gender pay gap is kind of an indicator of where there isn't a gender balance within an organisation, and actually the kind of business benefits for addressing the gender pay gap are really clear. So even though it's a legal requirement, I think that those businesses that really get it and see it, that it's an indicator of actually where they need to focus on, what they need to do to help women progress into more senior and high paid roles. So yeah, I think there are, and as you said, you reviewed loads of gender pay gap reports as part of this research, and you can see from some of the gender pay gap reports that those businesses that can just tick boxing and don't really see how the going through this analysis and just having a look at it, how it can actually bring benefits to their business.
Mm-hmm. And do you want to say a bit more about the research? I mean, what was the research about, and why? Yeah. How was it shaped? How did it take place?
Yes, so the idea was that we would better understand the gender pay gap for engineering roles and help to identify effective measures. So we commissioned WISE, which is the Women in Science and Engineering organisation, and they also worked with yourself on the focus groups. So we asked engineering companies to provide their data to us that they'd already submitted to the government as part of the gender pay gap reporting. So we had a number of companies give us their data on a confidential basis, and then that ended up being just under 42,000 engineers. So the pay data for 42,000 engineers from about 25 companies. So that data analysis was, I mean, it's a huge amount of data, but that was all broken down and analysed, looking at different aspects around career level, and what role they were in, where people were, what employer they worked for, and that gave us some insights, which we can kind of share some of the findings in a bit. But as well as that, there was a literature review, and also the focus groups to pull out and kind of tease out some of the thoughts around this, to help understand what the underlying causes for the gender pay gap are, and then what recommendations and kind of effective measures that we can suggest.
Okay, yeah, so I'd love to hear more about the results. But before we go there, I know one of the key findings was that actually what we found in the focus groups, that even the people coming to focus groups on the gender pay gap didn't quite understand what the gender pay gap is. What we found in the focus groups was some people in HR and reward were quite touchy about this, and we're like, wow, we don't have a pay problem in our organization. And I thought, well, that's not what the gender pay gap is about. So I was just wondering, and I'm going to bring up a poll for that, but I know some people don't get the poll because they are logged in from, through the, I think if you have it downloaded on your computer, like the Zoom, then you can see the poll, but maybe if you're logging in online, you can't. So the question is, are you comfortable explaining the gender pay gap to others so that they indeed understand what it is? And can you see people voting, Polly, or am I the only
Yes,
person?
yeah, I can see people.
Oh, yes, you can see the votes coming up, yeah.
Yeah, 12 people.
Yeah, because people find it difficult, right? So we've got, yeah, so let's close the poll, cast your votes. Are you comfortable explaining the gender pay gap to others so they actually understand? Oh, let's have a look. I'll end the polling there. Cast your last votes. Yep, and then share the results. So we've got, yeah, 60% of you, yeah, absolutely comfortable explaining, and 40% not so much. So then I'm going to bring up your slide there, Polly, because you have a really lovely way of explaining, which may be helpful to some of the people that may not be so comfortable explaining.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So this was a common through the focus groups, but and speaking to others as well. It is just a common kind of misunderstanding of the gender pay gap. And as Inga said, people in reports or talking to people saying that there was no, our company doesn't have a gender pay gap because we pay people the same, or people doing similar roles are paid the same. So the confusion with equal pay and what the difference between equal pay and gender pay gap was kind of clear finding. So we attempted to, and this came, we were inspired by a video that Shell, the company, have produced on the gender pay gap, and they have got this really nice video that kind of zooms in and explains what the gender pay gap is. So we try to visualize that in a kind of static form. So you've got two towers. So you've got a tower of with more men towards the top, working at the organisation, getting paid in the higher paid roles and more senior management roles, and then you've got a tower with women more scattered throughout, but more concentrated on the bottom. So if you zoomed into this imaginary tower of people working across in an organisation on the same floor, and looked at two people, a man and a woman, doing the same or similar role, they would be paid the same, and that would be looking, or not, as it is the case maybe, but that would be an equal pay issue. But the gender pay gap is the distribution of men and women across an organisation. So you're looking at the difference in the average hourly earnings for all men and all women across that organisation, that fictional tower, or if you're stepping back, maybe across a sector, across or the economy as a whole. So it's an indicator of gender parity within a workforce. So more men at the top in senior roles or high paid technical roles, they might not be the higher paid roles, the larger the gender pay gap. And then you've obviously, there are other aspects or things to consider around when you have lots of men in lower paid roles and more women in, or some women in higher paid and senior positions. The gender pay gap might be not as large as you might expect, but it's I think what we've found through the research is actually companies need to look at their own their own data and analyze what's sitting behind their figures, so that was a way of trying to show in a visual form what the gender pay gap is, to try and help because there was a lot of confusion with gender pay and equal pay.
Yeah. And what were the findings? You analysed all these reports. I mean, you did the focus groups. We analysed the reports. What did we find? Shall I bring up your slide there?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, so this is all done. Sorry.
Yes, so that's
yeah.
Research, yeah. So, but key finding, topic confuses people. So not only was the confusion around what is the gender pay gap, but also there was, and I think this came through the focus groups as well, but and the literature review, but and other pieces around, what are the underlying causes of a gender pay gap, and a low awareness of publicly available reports. There's a lot of advice, a lot of guidance, a lot of research already out there that identify the most effective measures that make the most difference, the biggest difference to women's pay and progression. And there was not a low understanding or recognition of what's already out there. Our kind of key finding, which was which we it is good in a way, was around the gender pay gap for engineers in the sample. The 42,000 engineers is smaller than the gender pay gap for all UK workers. But obviously there was still a gap. So the UK median gender pay gap is 17.3%, and the gap for our engineers was 11.4%. So there was still a gap. It's 2/3 smaller than the national average, but reducing the gap entirely is going to take kind of concerted effort across engineering to increase the number of women coming into the profession, but then also staying and progressing to the more senior roles. So that was a key finding there. The number 3 on the slide was we were looking at the kind of key most significant factors for the gender pay gap, and career level came out as the most significant factor. So once you controlled for, once you looked at type of role that someone was doing, their gender, where they worked, type of employer, where their career level, where they were, was the most significant cause of the gender pay gap, which would make complete sense, but it was helpful to have that played out in the data. So the little spinny graphs there at the bottom, little kind of pie charts. So 40% of the pay variance was accounted for by career level, which is large. But then you can see that those that were in the top career grades and those in the upper pay quartiles, it was over 90% were men.
So, Polly, a lot of people in engineering then say to me, well, that's just a historical thing. There didn't used to be any women in STEM subjects at university. I mean, what did the research say anything on that, or what is your view on that?
So there was looked a little bit at age and in terms of the pay gap by age, and there were you could say that there are fewer women that went into engineering at an earlier stage, and then so therefore there were fewer at the top because of an historical lag. But we did find that there is still a gender pay gap in the lowest age group, which is 18 to 21, I think. So still a 5% gender pay gap there, not necessarily because the men and women, the 18 and 19-year-olds, were being paid different starting salaries for the same role, but there was a indicator that men and women were going in the different types of engineering roles. Some were being more highly, the starting salary was higher in a particular area or particular professional with a particular skill set, and then men were going into those higher paid roles at the start. So it wasn't necessarily a gender pay gap, all because of a historical lag. You could see it at the very beginning as well, and that was the distribution of where men and women were choosing to, what types of roles that they were choosing to take, and then obviously that would then continue on.
Yeah, and we actually know from other research that women opt out more and drop out more out of engineering than men do. So that's another number you can use if you're looking to have some arguments for people that come up with that argument.
Yeah.
And then the fourth one, transparency.
And the fourth one, yeah, so it's around pay structures and grades. So where organisations, and I've included the chart there just because it's quite stark, where organisations in the sample that the ones that we looked at, where they used a salary range as well as a pay grade, their engineering gender pay gap was 75% smaller. So organisations' pay policies and the transparency of those policies have a real significant impact on the gender pay gap. And there is recent research published by the Government Equalities Office which shows that changes that make the processes for promotion and progression standardised and transparent, and so you know how to get, or what is needed to get to the next level or pay band, that's linked with improved career outcomes for women. So that was in terms of our kind of recommendation when we were that was a key recommendation, was about having transparent pay and progression policies to help close the gender pay gap.
Yeah, and perhaps helpful to clarify, because before we go to your questions and stories, because people think, oh, we have to then share people's salaries. Well, that's actually not the case, right? I mean, yeah, maybe you do, but when you talk about transparency, what we mean is visible grades, visible pay ranges, but also what a lot of women said, I know what grade my other colleagues are, but I don't know how to get there. So also being clear as what you need to do to get to that next level, what kind of boxes you need to tick.
Yeah.
And that often is a really key thing for women and helps them move up.
And the principles of that, the kind of the process of how to get to the next level, what you need to do and what you need to demonstrate. It removes the pressure to then have this murky world where you have to might negotiate your own pay. So because the principles are clear, open to scrutiny and understood by everybody, and that has a positive impact on women's progression.
So we have a bit of time here on questions on those findings. Natalie is asking, is the report available to read with the findings? Great question, of course. I mean, Polly, where can people find this report?
It is available. I think it's on one of the slides, but it's on our website. We have a big chunky version. Well, it's not chunky.
It is 50 pages, right? I mean, yeah, almost 50 pages.
And then a light touch, smaller leaflet, which has the findings and recommendations in with graphs and things like that. But it's on the Royal Academy of Engineering's website, and there is a link in the slides, which I assume they'll be sent round afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, talking of effective practices, someone says, as in you would like some. Oh, what are some of the top recommendations? Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute, because that's obviously, we want to keep a lot of time, but also keen to hear from you. I mean, did you have any interesting findings when you did your gender pay gap? For those people that are on the call that did their gender pay gap reporting and were involved in the research, what did you find? Yeah, no one coming in there. So feel free to come in anytime. With your questions or chat with others when you like. If there's any further thoughts, I think, recommendations are definitely the key bit, right, Polly? So shall I share your slides again? Let me see, and then we can find the recommendations. Here we go.
Yes, so we broke it down into kind of some key recommendations just for employers generally, but then we drew up more detailed recommendations for 3 different groups. So for HR pay and reward specialists, line managers, and then CEOs. So for the employers, I've just put those. So if you want there's a lot more information in the report, but in terms of just the general recommendations, it was around understanding the causes of the gender pay gap and also which solutions are proven effective. And I've included some links in the slide later on to some of the, for example, the Government Equalities Office have published a report which just lists the most effective actions and then lists the ones that aren't proven to be effective yet. So having a thorough understanding of your own gender pay gap, its causes, which may be different from another organisation's, and then which solutions are proven to be effective. Analysing the data, so we listed in the report kind of the things to consider when collecting and analysing your data. So extracting the pay data for different types of roles, measuring progression by gender and hours of work, measuring pay rises and performance ratings by gender and hours of work, controlling for role, age, etc. So there's more detail under that second one of kind of the things to consider when you do analyse your data. The third one, which we just discussed around the transparent pay and progression policy, which is the most, from our research, was the most effective measure that employers can take, particularly for us for the engineering, but also would be transferable to other sectors. And then the third about the kind of credible action plan, which goes beyond the mandated requirements. So we found, and this was Inga, you're looking at those 50 reports. There's a tendency for engineering in particular to say, well, there's not enough women coming in at the beginning, so there's not much we can do about it as an employer. But actually, there's a huge amount in terms of women's pay and progression to senior and high paid roles that sit, those actions sit within the employer's control. So it's trying to move the narrative on from there's nothing we can do about it, it's all about schools and and societal things, to actually focusing on what employers can do now, and which I think has been quite powerful. So the action plan, which should tackle the underlying causes and focus on what's within the employer's control, what's within your control, rather than it's about schools and outreach, which it may be in certain professions that might be the case, but there's also things that can be done with by employers now to help women progress to senior.
Yeah, and to add there, Polly, what we also find then, and what came up in the focus groups, if at the moment the engineers that you have are leaving and the female engineers that you have aren't happy, they're not going to be great role models. So role models is a key thing to drive people to be in the industry. So if you keep the women that you've got, make sure they move up and become visible, then you're also doing your outreach, but in a way that is within your control.
Yeah. And so for the engineering profession, which might be different, but there's a huge number of SMEs. So it's something like 97% of employees in engineering are SMEs. So they're under 250. But the actions and the issues will be similar or comparable, and there are actions that are relevant for SMEs, and that will help them to attract and retain talent if they're able to demonstrate that they're taking gender balance and gender parity and diverse teams in taking those issues seriously. So we did look at the kind of, as part of the business case, the business benefits to tackling gender pay gap. So more young women are entering the profession, and there's anecdotal evidence that they are asking to see gender pay gap reports and asking prospective employers at the interview stage what they're doing to close the gap, which is very interesting. And then there's public sector clients asking prospective contractors about the gender pay gap. So it's more than just meeting the legal requirements. There are kind of business benefits of tackling those, which will be applicable to both to SMEs as well as to the large organisations that have also the legal requirement to publish an action plan and their report.
Yeah, and you've got some recommendations for HR pay and reward specialists. So do you want to share those?
So I just picked out, so we've actually got around, there's probably about 10 in the report for each group. So I just picked out a couple, so that's just to highlight. But we tried to, from the focus groups and from the discussions and then from the literature review and the other bits of research, to pick out some of what the main issues were, and then what the solution could be to that, just to help kind of navigate through. So if the issue was around the rates for the job and how to progress are unclear, and perhaps women are saying that in the organisation, or that's the understanding, then what the solution would be about publishing career levels. If there's manager discretion that's potentially introducing bias, then what can you do about that? So we listed kind of issue and then possible solutions. So they may not. So some of them will be more relevant than others, but we're trying to kind of flesh it out so there's enough that an employer, an organisation will be able to take a couple of them and take those forward as concrete actions.
And can you say something? Review promotion criteria and consider job sharing?
Yes. So looking at so if women are underrepresented in senior roles, these are all kind of tied in together, but it was part of that about having a kind of transparency of how progression and pay grades, but looking at the criteria for promotion and making sure that that's clear, that there isn't any unintended bias, what's really essential for the role, that's rather than just a long list of rather than too many things in the essential criteria, and actually is that really essential to do that role and what's desirable for that role. So having a much better sense of the core skills that are required, and then what's required to promote for promotion, and then more flexible working options for senior roles, and where people are taking up flexible working options, and publicising those, making those more visible, so it becomes part of the norm.
Yeah, so a question that we get up front, and thank you so much for sending us those questions. So we, I mean, a lot of people told us what you were expecting from this call and what you wanted to hear. So we're bringing some of those in as well. They say, well, it's really just about, and I mean, we heard this in the focus groups too, really the problem is women are just afraid to ask for a raise. They don't negotiate. I mean, you're saying here it's all to HR and pay to make it transparent. I mean, what would you say to that, Polly? Is this a problem of women? Is it because women don't negotiate?
Well, there is research that shows that women are less likely to negotiate their pay, but they're partly put off because they're not sure what a reasonable offer is. So where there is a better, clearer structure and process, then the boundaries are to work to are clearer. And so being more transparent has a positive impact, because it removes the pressure for women to have to negotiate their own pay to such an extent, because there are principles that everybody understands. But from the focus groups, there was a real kind of aversion to discussing pay, where I think one of the points that we had was that we had a group of female engineers and a group of male engineers, and even in the group of female engineers, as a kind of a safe space, they were still uncomfortable and almost apologetic, potentially, about raising pay issues.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of a cultural aversion to discussing pay, but then there's the research does show, on top of that, women are less likely to negotiate their pay. So transparency benefits all, but would benefit women in a more positive way.
Yeah, and one of the reasons women are put off by negotiating is men get what they ask and women don't. So that's what really struck me in the literature, that if women ask, they either ask it in the wrong way, so they don't get it, or there is a bias towards what they do, or the type of roles they do, or the type of image they project, like the sort of thing where, oh, women don't have the gravitas, or oh yeah, she just doesn't look like a leader. We don't see the potential in her, which makes that the women that do ask often also don't get, which then makes you, or there is little, some of the women said there's little things that put you off, sort of, wow, I really had to stick my neck out to get you this role. What if someone says that? How are you going to say, well, actually, I also want to pay more than the salary you offer? So there is a narrative around women asking for pay and women getting promotions that also puts women off. So it isn't just a problem with women. This is and all of that, yeah, is solved by, as you say, making it more transparent. I mean, another question that came up around this is actually, I mean, a lot of women aren't that keen to move up. So even if it is all transparent, they just choose themselves not to want those promotions. I mean, how is that? How do you see that, Polly?
Well, I think there are men and women that don't necessarily want the senior management roles, and actually in engineering there's the kind of technical, highly skilled technical roles. There sometimes there's a choice between staying in the ones where you're the really interesting, the highly skilled roles, or going into the kind of management and up roles, and I think that it's individual choice, but we need to make sure that when someone wants to move into those management roles and up to into more and progress into more senior roles, that there's no barriers and the opportunities are there, and role models and showing that having flexible working and different options for senior roles would I think help break down some of the traditional once you go into move up into a senior role, then it's there's no flexibility, that's it, and I think there's lots of good practice out there where senior managers are demonstrating through their own behaviours and their own kind kind of choices and support from the employer, that it is possible for senior level roles for those kind of flexible working options to be available, and then that helps kind of open it up as a route for women.
Yeah, because the reason women don't want to move up is often a bit more complicated, right? They feel it doesn't fit with their current life, and that's to do with flexibility, or they don't like the culture or the responsibility that comes with the roles. And some of that can be taken away by actually explaining better what those roles are, and having senior leaders that look and behave differently, and changing that culture at the senior level. So also that isn't necessarily something that women can change on their own. It is something that the organization can change.
Yeah.
So let me just, have we got any more recommendation? No. So that's where I just want to stop sharing for a moment and give you a bit of a chance. Have a look at the chat, because we have lots of questions that have come in here. Let me see. If women are given more flexibility with working part-time in the industry, could this mean a bigger gender pay gap? Because women are more likely to want or ask for part-time hours. I'd like to answer that, because what we got actually is that the organizations that we have working on the research, and we've got some numbers on that I'd love from you as well, Polly, is that basically the policy in organizations is that if you work flexible, you earn the same pro rata. So it shouldn't make a difference to the gender pay gap, but it does often influence moving up, because if you work less hours, you're seen as less committed, you have also built up less experience. So that's two reasons that you move up slower. So yeah, definitely that is true. So it's about encouraging men to take up those flexible roles too. Yeah. Would you, anything from the research there that I've missed, Polly?
No, that's I think that the part-time just in itself doesn't have an impact on gender pay gap, but it's the ability then to progress and ensuring that it's not just women who are doing the caring responsibilities are shared more evenly between men and women.
Then have you found role modeling, visibility and mentoring is enough to support women to progress? Or is there any extra support needed, like coaching and sponsorship? And obviously, so we have the transparency, we have all that. Is that enough, Polly?
I was just going to, there was the Government Equalities Office looked at all different kinds of actions that employers were taking, and then kind of ranked them by whether they were effective, whether they had mixed results, or if they were promising. And the mentoring and sponsorship and kind of networking programs were kind of judged to be promising, but we were not sure if they're actually making a difference yet. But the most effective actions were the kind of harder things to do, but more effective, and that is the transparency to processes, using structured interviews for recruitment and promotion, skills-based assessment tasks when you're recruiting, including multiple women in shortlists for recruitment. So they had some really kind of the concrete actions that do make a difference, but then around the kind of role modelling, mentoring, visibility, the effectiveness of those actions obviously depends on the employer, depends on the context, but overall, when they were looking across a range of employers, it looked promising, but the data and the research isn't quite there to put it into the effective box yet.
So Emma's saying offering flexible working will allow more women to return after maternity leave. So it would definitely help after coming back. And about actually getting women into engineering, right? Because if engineering offers better flexibility than other industries, you get more women. So good point there, Emma.
Yeah.
Anita, do you have any findings regarding performance appraisals and the role of managers? Yes, we do. A recent report shows that women get less frequent and lower quality feedback than men do. And in one case study, the feedback for the man was more direct, specific, and critical, with concrete suggestions for how he could improve. And yet, to add to that, Anita, I know the research, indeed, and women often get more personal feedback on, oh, you need to have more gravitas, you need to be more confident, you need to communicate differently, whereas men get much more concrete suggestions and often actually also suggestions there for improvement. It's very much what we found from the focus groups between male and female engineers when we asked them, which I thought was a very powerful question, what helped you move up in your career? The men started talking about their own qualities, which you'd sort of expect. I'm brilliant, so I'm moving up, to summarize and paraphrase here. Whereas, and the second thing that helped them was their manager and performance reviews. So they would instantly say, yeah, I had really good performance review. I had a manager that supported me up and sponsored me, and that helped me. Whereas women were much less likely, like hardly any of the women in the focus group mentioned that their manager had been helpful. They didn't mention, they did mention their own qualities, but much later. What the women mentioned was support from others, coaching, mentoring, special programs for women. All the things that Polly has just said aren't so effective, have been effective for those individual women that didn't move up. But there's a lot of women that, because you don't have the structure in place and the processes in place, aren't moving up. So, I mean, yeah, you can put, if you get the scaffolding right, you don't actually have to give all these individual women all these support. So if, yeah, there is, so yeah, definitely performance appraisals play a huge role and seem to be working much better for men than for women. So that's an interesting finding. Anything you want to add there, Polly?
No, that's I think that your point about the processes and the scaffolding, I like that term. It shouldn't be down to individual women and
yeah, getting all this individual support. Yeah,
it's getting the framework and the environment right, so everybody is clear on how and what's needed to move to the next roles, rather than individual down to the women to do that themselves, or have, in terms of mentoring and support, which is valuable and does help, but when you haven't got the right environment in place, it is going to be very difficult to then see any change.
Yeah, so we've got Jessica saying, yeah, senior job roles need modernizing. There's no barrier to success by having job shares. Absolutely agree. Yeah, that would be a great idea, job shares, or just different roles, roles, especially in engineering. There's a lot of project work. I mean, there's no reason why project work has to be 40 or 50 hours a week. It's a random number, right? We make that number up. Natalie saying, could pay be based on outcomes and objectives rather than hours worked? Definitely, yeah, this could help to improve the gender pay gap, and it would avoid presenteeism. Yeah, absolutely. The moment, yeah, making pay transparent, making it clear what you need to do to move up, and actually basing pay on outcomes and objectives. We know that is something that works not from our research, I think, Polly, do we?
Yes, yeah, I think it's interesting, the presenteeism point. And I think that's businesses that seeing the kind of true benefits of having flexible working, and actually the trust in employees, because it is about outcome, it is about what's being delivered, rather than if you're sitting at your desk. And I think other kind of more modern employers that are really seeing the benefits from supporting their workforce in that way.
If there's anything else that you've done that we've missed that you think has had a massive impact in your organization, let us know, or anything you're instantly going to do. I'd love to hear that, what you're going to do next. We've got a couple of tips for you, and some nice offers coming up as well. So let us know what worked for you, what has had an impact in your organization, or what you're trying that is looking very promising. Someone's asking where you can see the government report. Yeah, at the end, we've got a list of resources coming up, so do hang on for those. Syria asked if maternity contributed to the gender pay gap among engineers, and I'm also interested in this. Oh, missed out that one. Yeah, what do we know, Polly? Did maternity contribute?
I'm not sure. I'd have to go just to check the data on what they actually, because we're just looking at the data for engineers in terms of the 42,000 that were analysed, but whether they also then looked. I don't think maternity is in if they'd taken a maternity break, they come back to work part-time afterwards. So there was something about a kind of progression and pay stalling during career breaks.
Yeah, there were some really interesting examples there. What happens is that actually during maternity, women miss out on pay rises because they were away, so they don't get discussed. So that is something actually that most progressive companies actively manage. So HR and Reward are actively managing that women that are on maternity leave still get their promotions or their sort of annual pay rises that everyone else gets. And then there were anecdotal examples as well of women returning and being sort of docked in pay informally, or, well, you've been away, so obviously you're not getting any promotion, and obviously you're not getting any rises. So they were like excluded up front. And it's really, really hard to argue or negotiate with a boss who's already made his mind up or her mind up that, yeah, you don't count because you've been away and maybe you're not as committed. So there are companies that the most progressive companies in HR and award actively manage that and actually go to managers and have those conversations and say what is going on there. And they do like analysis, statistical analysis as well of the pay. And then you can see like, and promotions, which helps you see whether it's all the men getting the promotions rather, and not all the women. So that gives like, or whether it's all the women on maternity leave missing out. Question coming in, please can the slides be shared? Yeah, there'll be an email with the slides shared. How realistic is it as women move to more senior roles to continue to expect flexible arrangements? My impression is that it's harder to have those conversations with senior management and negotiate those arrangements. Yeah, great question. Personally, I think it's possible in every role, and you see, especially if you go to more top senior roles, you can create, you see very senior men and women do that, create your own flexibility. You're mostly on the go, you're having conversations with clients left, right and center. You might as well work from home. You're not even at your desk. So there is, I mean, in a lot of roles, I think it is very realistic. I don't know, any thoughts there, Polly?
Yeah, no, I think there's lots of examples where that it's doable. So I think that the companies and the organisations that are really wanting to support career progression for women and really see the benefits of diversity and inclusion are looking at that and taking it seriously. And there's loads of really good examples. So I think it can be a difficult conversation depending on the environment and the context. And you know, if you're the first one in a senior role to take that kind of step, but I think where both men and women at senior levels are having flexible working arrangements, then it's a really positive movement and a signal, I think, to the organisation that it takes diversity and inclusion seriously and really understands the benefits that it brings.
But we have a complete sort of virtual interview coming up on flexible working. So if you're interested in more on flexible working at senior levels and how companies have introduced it in the tech sector, we have, I think we have almost certain someone from the tech sector coming to talk about that somewhere in spring. We also have some really nice offers for you here as a special thank you for joining us on this call. We have, like, because a lot of people actually in the questions asked, but it's about getting senior commitment. Yeah, my leaders just aren't committed. And yeah, as we know, Polly, that is very important, right? To get any of this scaffolding in place to make it work, you've got to have your senior leaders on board. You need budget, you need people, resources, and you need to be allowed to make those changes and do those projects. So we have a session coming up in 2 weeks' time on that. So do book for that. It's a face-to-face session. And if you can't make that, there's also a webinar on the next day. And as a special thank you for being here, Jane is going to post you a really nice code that in the next 24 hours is going to give you 10% discount. So if you join us in 2 weeks' time in that face-to-face session or on the webinar, you get the 10% discount. And for those of you here on the webinar, I will also throw in my book. So you get my book because I'd love to see you face-to-face, meet you at our face-to-face sessions as well. So if you join us, I'll bring some extra books and remind me that I promised to give you one, and you'll get one signed by me. So we have that on offer for you. We have a lot more coming up as well with the Big Fish Academy. We're really keen to keep on supporting you in your diversity and inclusion roles. So let us know what topics you'd like us to discuss. A lot of just staying up to date with the latest is what these virtual interviews are about. In the face-to-face sessions, it's very much about building your skills. So in the session with senior leaders, we really look at how can you have that conversation with senior leaders that say, well, it is very important to us, you know, but it's on the boardroom agenda, but we just never get round to it. How do you have a conversation that helps them understand that, yeah, what that says? Or we all know those leaders who say this, well, it's great, but we really don't have the capacity at the moment to do this. Or great, you go ahead and do this because I don't have the capacity. And I'm sure in HR, you can make this work. you've got my full support. Yeah, obviously it doesn't mean they are doing anything. Or how do you have the conversations with leaders like that? So we'll be practicing with that, giving you techniques, doing some little role plays and helping you think through how you can win the hearts and minds from those leaders. The minds with the business case, the numbers like this report, Polly, and the numbers in here, sort of scaring them with what the competition is doing is a nice technique for it, or inspiring them with what the competition is doing. So we'll talk about those things at the next session. And the next training program is about those middle managers. How do you get those on board? Because once you've got the senior leaders on board, there's those people that have the targets, that have to hit the production targets, that are hiring people, get them on board. So we talk about that in the next training session. So just want to thank you all for being here. We would absolutely love your feedback, because we need to know, is this working? Is it working for you? So there's a little link there coming in from Jane. If you could just take 1 more minute to let us know how we did, what it was like for you, we'd be super, super grateful. And then we can make sure we keep on giving you the right content. Want to thank you, Polly, for being here. You've done really, really great sharing some of this. And let me also share your last slide, because that's actually a very powerful slide. Where have I got it? Here we are. With all the resources.
Yeah.
So yeah, here are loads of resources, and you'll get the slides of where you can find some of the things that Polly mentioned. The Government Equality Office, the Equality Human Rights Commission has some brilliant resources. Royal Academies themselves have some really, not just this report, but some really practical guidelines, toolkits on how you can do more on a lot of the topics that to implement the things that do work to close the gender pay gap. So I'll see if we've got any last comments. Continue the conversation with the other attendees. Yeah, I'm going to be here for the next 10 minutes at least, so feel free to continue with me. It was really, really good to have you all here. Yeah, let me know if you are interested in the book. I can send you a link to where you can get it, so people are interested in that. It's really good to have you here. Thank you so much, and we'll be closing off now. Thank you.
Thank you.